welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got just about an hour together. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel in a moment. And before I do that, I do want to clarify everybody should have been on mute when you first came in. If you would please just keep your line on mute. That way we avoid any background noise. If you've got questions along the way, there is a chat box, and it'll look a little different whether you have signed in from the actual Teams application or if you used the web browser. But generally, it looks like a little conversation icon. So it looks like that little word cloud kind of thing. If you click on that, you'll see that it says show conversation, and you can enter your questions in there. There's also some gestures so that if you wanted to raise your hand at some point, you're certainly welcome to do that as well. And we should have time for at least a few questions at the end of today's presentation. With that, Daniel, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll dive into the content.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, as Robert said, good morning to everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate that. My name is Daniel Kuhar, and I'm the Business Development Specialist for the Nebraska PTAC. The Nebraska PTAC team helps to offer free business consulting in the area of government contracting. And we kind of provide services all along the spectrum of government contracting. So if anything today piques your interest or you're kind of stuck on anything, feel free to shoot me an email and I will send that in the chat box for you. I think Robert went over the housekeeping, so we're good to go there. So today's Reading and Responding to RFPs webinar is presented by Robert Jones from Left Brain Professionals. Robert is a consultant to small and mid-sized businesses and is experienced in a variety of roles, including strategic planning, consulting, financial analysis, government work, regulatory compliance, and more. His government knowledge comes firsthand from managing over $30 million in federal contracts. As a certified federal contracts manager, Robert has demonstrated highest standards for education, training, and experience within contract management competencies. This certification is the most prestigious certification of the National Contract Management Association. So we're very happy to have Robert join us today to share his expertise on reading and responding to RFPs. Thanks, Robert.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. Again, good morning. My name is Robert Jones. The firm is Left Brain Professionals. And give me just a second here to get the slides moving. There we go. We are a boutique accounting firm in that we work only with government contractors. We practice primarily accounting system design, implementation, and audit support. We do a lot of work helping clients prepare for and pass, for example, the SF 1408 survey. That's obtaining an adequate or an approved accounting system. A lot of work with indirect rates, strategic pricing, and again, kind of all things government contract accounting. With that, obviously, comes our topic for today of reading and responding to RFPs. And a lot of work that we do with that is around the cost and pricing, but we do help people with general compliance when they're putting together a proposal for the government. Our learning objectives, at the end of our time together, you should be able to describe the structure of RFPs, including the individual sections, list the steps for proposal preparation, list questions for internal evaluation of your proposal, describe best practices for proposal preparation. All right, let's dive in here to the RFP structure. I've actually got a lot of info to get through in an hour, so this will probably be rather fast-paced. But again, we are recording this, and we can make the recording available to Daniel and as well through our website later on. All right, one thing, let me start before I get into this particular part of the content is just lay a little, I guess, background here. One of the confusing and frustrating things at times is, from my perspective of teaching government stuff, and this particular topic here is a perfect example, is that the government doesn't always do what they say they're going to do, and they don't always follow their own rules. It gets more complicated when, you know, as a contractor, you may be at times a sub to another contractor, or maybe you're, a prime on a contract. And so what we're going to go through here today, the reason I say that, what we're going to go through here today is what's supposed to be and what the desired structure is. Now, what I will tell you is that the same information should be available in any RFP, whether it's directly from the government, whether it is from a prime, and whether or not they're following this particular structure and format, right? So the information should be there, but it may not look exactly like this. So I don't want you to go away today and then call me next week and say, hey, Robert, I just got this RFP that I downloaded from sam.gov, and it doesn't look anything at all like what you talked about, right? So just be prepared that if you're new to this game, that might be, some of what you see. And for those of you who maybe have already been playing the government contracting game for a little while, you may already be well aware of this. All right, so RFPs are generally structured into 4 parts, and they're just sections, as you see here, A through H, I, J, and K through M. We're going to do a deep dive, so don't get caught up in that right now. This statement here is really why it's critical, from what I was saying earlier, why it's critical that you need to read the entire RFP, all the attachments, all the reference clauses and documents, because again, the government doesn't always follow the same format. And when you're dealing with primes, they may have their own format. And if you're dealing one day with Northrop and another day with Boeing and another day with Raytheon, they all do things a little bit differently. So, just keep in mind that you may have to read multiple documents. You may have to go log into a portal somewhere and download additional documents, but you want to make sure that you've got everything, including any referenced attachments or referenced clauses that may not have been part of the original thing, right? So that's one of the other things that can be confusing, is you say, well, I downloaded, this package, isn't this everything? Not always the case, right? Oftentimes you have to go somewhere else and download additional information. And here, yeah, just don't assume that all RFPs are equal for the reasons that we were talking about. All right, part 1, section A of the RFP is general information. Often consists of a single page. For example, and directly from the government, that's the standard form 33. It provides basic information such as the solicitation number, the type of contract that's expected to be awarded, when and where to submit your bid, very, very important information. Contact information, for example, who's the contracting officer, or, again, in the case of the prime, who's the buyer or the subcontracts manager, whoever you're supposed to deal with any questions. Section B is a list of the supplies or services and prices. So typically what you see is like a table, and it'll have by CLIN, which is the contract line item number, or by SLIN, which is the subcontract line item number. They're really the same thing. We just call them different things. But it's going to have, that identification. It's going to have, a description. And then right there's a blank spot where you would otherwise enter your price. Keep in mind that in some bidding situations, you might actually have to submit that actual form with your prices on that form, right? Many times we submit something in our own format, and that's acceptable. But that's also, again, one of the things you want to make sure that when you're reading through when you're reading through the RFP and the instructions, make sure you know what the expected format is, whether it can be in your format or whether they have specific forms that they want you to fill out. Section B, oftentimes I say, is often the bulk of the RFP in terms of the pages, right? Because that's where it's going to be talking about, again, what the government is wanting to buy. All the requirements are usually listed as CLINs or SLINs. It can include other bill items such as travel and ODCs, right? So even in a services contract, for example, where the government might say, we want to buy, these labor categories, or we want to buy these types of services from you, whatever that is, there may be other line items in there as well. Section C is a good connection right into Section B, because this is where you will have the description, the specification, or the SAL, again, depending on what the government is buying from you as to what's in here. right? Oftentimes, if it's development type of work, right, you're going to have a SAL, you're going to have a statement of work. They want you to do these kinds of things. If they're buying services from you in general, right, often again, there's a SAL in there that says these are the types of things that they're expecting you to do. If they're buying a product from you, then it might be a description or a specification document. They need to buy a widget that's, X by Y by Z and operates at P speed and, whatever those specifications are, having a separate document for that. This is that detailed description of the work to be performed or the product to be delivered. This is, again, here really the heart of the proposal. This is what the agency needs from you. This is the problem they're trying to solve. And, this is where when you're putting together your proposal, you want to make sure that you're describing how you're going to fulfill the contract. Make sure that your solution meets all the specifications, that it addresses all the items in the SAL, that you are solving the government's problem, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what the proposal is about, right? The RFP is the government says, I have a problem, I have a need, and your proposal says, I have a solution. And you want to make sure that your solution document is clear, unambiguous, right? And that it does address all of the specific needs. Important to note here, especially on many service contracts, there will oftentimes be very specific labor category requirements. This requires you to map your existing employees and your internal labor categories or job descriptions into a new set of descriptions. It's also important to note here that, again, this is where, like all RFPs, all contracts are not equal. What qualifies as a senior engineer on one contract might have very different requirements for a senior engineer on another contract and another contract and another contract and so on. For example, what you call an internal senior engineer might be an engineer 2 on one contract, might be an engineer 3 on another contract, might be a senior engineer on another contract. So very important that you again, when you're selling services, if there are labor categories that are in the RFP, make sure that you understand the specific requirements of those labor categories. And when we talk about labor categories, we're talking about experience, education, certification. Those are the three main things, right? So education, experience, certification. Make sure that all of that lines up with the employees that you are proposing to do that work. Section D deals with packaging and marking. So this, again, if you're selling a product that's going to be delivered, make sure that you know what the packaging requirements are. Many times, especially in DoD, but even elsewhere in the government at times, but I see a lot of this in the Department of Defense. They're very specific packaging requirements because many times you may be shipping your product to another company who's going to aggregate multiple products together and put it in a shipping container. Your product may be shipped by boat. It may be shipped to the Middle East where there's a lot of sand. I mean, there are different things that come into play. And so you want to make sure that you understand the very specific packaging and marking requirements. The one thing that I will tell you is that there are companies out there that this is what they do all day, every day. So there are companies that their sole purpose in life is to do packaging and marking that meets government specifications. And if you're not used to doing this, or maybe you don't have the proper equipment to do it, oftentimes there's probably somebody nearby you who does this. You ship your product to them. They package it up. And then depending on the relationship, they may ship it on for you, or they'll deliver it back to you, and then you can do your shipping from your facility. Many times with the government, we do need UID or unique identification labels. Again, a very specific requirement about how those labels are made, the information that's encoded in the barcode on there, and where and how they are affixed to the equipment that you are selling. Kind of already mentioned this, right, that oftentimes there's mil-spec packaging, that your packaging must be able to resist water and sand, as an example. Quick reminder for those of you that may have joined after we did the opening, if you would just please make sure that your line is muted so that we avoid any background noise, please. I appreciate that. Section E is inspection and acceptance. So this identifies when and where the inspection and acceptance will occur. So inspection means that the government may want to come in and observe you performing the work. They may want to observe you manufacturing the product. You know, if you're in construction, they will want to come to the site, right, and make observations as you are doing the construction. I worked in an environment in the past where DCMA would come in. We were manufacturing high-end electronics, but they were these big black boxes, and so there were multiple modules inside. And DCMA wanted to come in and observe some of those inspection points before getting just the final box, meaning they wanted to see, we want to inspect module A and module B and module C before you put the cover on them, and then we want to inspect the big black box with all of the modules installed before you put the cover on the big black box, as an example. Acceptance means, you know, when does the government do final inspection and say, yes, we accept this product as is now, we're taking it. Part of what's important to know there is that the inspection and from the inspection perspective, one of the important things to know is that you may have to notify an inspector to come in, and they don't respond that day. They may not be able to respond the next day, as an example. Oftentimes with DCMA, you have to schedule them 2, 3, 4 days in advance for them to be able to come in and do an inspection. So that means you got to take that into consideration when you're putting together the production plan, and make sure that, you know, you don't want to run all the way up to the last day and then be calling, you know, DCMA or whoever is going to come in and do the inspection, and then you're sitting there waiting and you're stuck, and maybe you end up being late delivering the product because you didn't notify the inspectors in time. From the acceptance perspective, one of the things to keep in mind there is that, again, depending on the product that you may be delivering, maybe you deliver your product on site somewhere, then it has to be installed, then it has to be tested, and then the employees have to be trained before acceptance occurs, as an example. So in that case, those types of things from an acceptance perspective can potentially impact your revenue recognition. So that's why understanding acceptance is important, because just because you put it on the truck and shipped it out doesn't necessarily mean you get to recognize revenue on that if there are follow-up acceptance requirements that are part of your contract. Kind of already mentioned these things, right? Acceptance may occur after delivery and testing. We've seen acceptance occur at the end of the production period, right? So sometimes we've seen the government come in and accept it at the facility before it even goes onto the truck. So just make sure, again, you understand what the requirements are in the RFP and what you would expect to be in the contract. Section F of the RFP deals with deliveries or performance. This is the where and how the item is delivered. Keep in mind that sometimes product may be shipped to multiple locations in different quantities or by different methods. So again, in my past in manufacturing, sometimes the government would buy tens of units, right, multiple units from us, and we might ship some of the units to one location and some of the units to a different location. You got to know, right, well, you can't assume that they're all going to the same place. One of the issues when you're shipping to different locations is you also got to keep in mind the delivery time to get there, right? One location may be farther away, might take longer for the truck to get there. Some locations only accept certain incoming delivery methods. They only accept deliveries on certain days. They may only accept deliveries up to a certain hour. I mean, we've seen situations where you know, the dock closes, for example, at 3 p.m. local time. So you've got to keep that in mind that, hey, if my product's got to be there at a specific time, again, what are the impacts outside of the production environment, right, that are going to affect me making my delivery? and how do I factor those things into my production schedule. Section G is the contract administration data. So this can include things like you may have to do status reporting. There are accounting and appropriation data. This is really important when it comes to wide area workflow. As an example, if you're doing direct business with the government as a prime and you need to submit your invoice through wide area workflow, you have to make sure that you have the proper CLIN and ACRN information. All of that would be in your contract. So you want to make sure that you know what those types of things are. It's not uncommon for government contracts to have multiple sources of funding, meaning that sometimes multiple offices or agencies will come together to place a single order through another agency, and they do that oftentimes because they can get quantity discounts, right? So I need 10, you need 15, somebody else needs 20. Why don't we all go together and buy that at one time and save the money, government overall? So again, you may need to know that kind of information when it comes to the billing side of stuff. You're also going to have the contact information for key agency personnel. So this is going to be your administrative contracting officer, the core, things like that. Keep in mind that some functions may be delegated such that the person you initially dealt with as the contracting officer, they may end up delegating some of those functions to somebody else, for example, the ACO or the core. And so you may be pointed to those people at those times. Section H is special contract requirement. This is basically some other unique requirement that's not addressed elsewhere. For some programs, this is where you might find that program-specific information. So not only, for example, when you're dealing with the government or with the DoD, I use a prime example with DoD, your contract is going to be a FAR-based contract, which is the Federal Acquisition Regulations. You're also going to be dealing with the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations Supplement, or the DFAR. So it's the Department of Defense's additional rules that come into play. And then oftentimes when you are doing work on a specific program, there may be additional program rules that come into play, on top of the FAR and the DFARs. And so this is where you might find that information. Part 2 of the RFP has one section, that's section I, for the contract clauses. These are the clauses that would be included in any resulting contract. They can include clauses in full text as well as clauses incorporated by reference. So be very careful. When you are looking through the RFP, again, arguably all sections of the RFP are very important. This is a really important section of the RFP, kind of next to what is the product or service you're delivering, but what are the terms of the contract going to be? And you want to make sure that you know what's in there and that you put together your bid accordingly. You want to make sure that you are compliant or can or will be compliant with the contract clauses at the time of award. That's a really important factor. One of the things I will pause here for a moment and say, so typically when you have clauses here, again, these are things that you would need to comply with at the time of award, meaning you might have a little bit of time between now, and when you're submitting your proposal and when they make the award to actually, finalize those things, because it's when you sign the contract, when you get the actual award is when it's going to be key. The one difference to this right now are the new CMMC, or the cybersecurity model maturity certification requirements, those cybersecurity requirements that are changing. One of the things that's changing is that you have to be compliant with the stated level of CMMC in the RFP at the time you actually make the proposal. So again, that's one of the things that's different. For the new CMMC stuff that's rolling out, you do need to be compliant at the level that's identified in the RFP at the time you submit the proposal. So big issue for many companies out there right now. Let me back up for just a moment and say, these clauses incorporated by reference, you want to make sure that you are downloading, go print them off. Don't just say, oh, I'll go read it. Maybe I'll go read it another time. go get them, download them, save them with your file so that you've got all of this in the future if there's ever a question. Again, I kind of mentioned some of this already, but this is going to include things like the FAR, any agency supplements, or any other clauses. So again, sometimes what we've seen, even within DoD as an example, if you're dealing with the Army versus the Air Force may have their own forms they want you to fill out. If you're dealing with Warner Robins versus another base, Warner Robins may have their own forms that they want you to fill out for some reason. So just be aware, again, that there may be stuff that's unique. And you might say, well, it's all government contracts. Isn't it the same? Or it's all DoD. Isn't it the same? Again, not necessarily. So make sure that you're reading in there and you know what's incorporated. Part 3 is the list of attachments. So this would be, other documents. Keep in mind that RFPs and contracts are very rarely a single document. Usually, right, you're going to have, particularly in the world of the RFP, you have the solicitation. You may have an amendment to the solicitation. You may have, sometimes they'll put, obviously the SAO and the spec as different documents. They'll have different forms out there that are part of the whole RFP. Make sure that, again, whether this is an RFP you're getting from sam.gov, whether it's something you're getting from one of the primes, make sure that if there's attachments, if there's documents that are referenced, make sure you've got those documents. Again, keep in mind that you might need to log in to another portal. You might need to go to a different website in order to obtain those documents. Get all of them, keep them with your files. Things here might be included such as drawings, again, specifications, the statement of work. Keep in mind that oftentimes those things are considered sensitive, and so they, again, may not be distributed with the actual solicitation itself. You may have to request them separately. So part 4 of the RFP is has some multiple sections in here. The first is section K, dealing with the reps and certs. So this is where you are affirming your compliance or ability to receive the contract. There are a number of things in here. You want to make sure that you read through them. These are the types of things that when you set up your sam.gov account and you had to go in there and say, we're a small business and whatever, there's all kinds of questions in there. You have to answer those same questions for each contract. So you want to make sure that you read through them, make sure nothing has changed in your organization. That's one of the things I've seen happen, is that as companies grow and change, somebody who's filling this out gets used to just checking certain boxes and they start to kind of do it blindly. And you want to make sure, again, that you're really reading through and you know what you're checking, because this is, again, where you are affirming your compliance or ability to receive a contract. Section L, proposal preparation instructions. Again, a really key section of the RFP. You want to know what is expected. Is there a certain number of pages? Remember back to college where, the professor would say, I want a 10-page paper and it's got to be 1-inch margins and it's Times New Roman, size 12, double spaced, whatever that was. Right, because the instructor didn't want you messing around and trying to, stretch it out or do something. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. You want to make sure that you know what those requirements are. Again, keep in mind that some of the proposal prep instructions might be that you have to fill out a specific form. They might want you to put your pricing information into their documents. They may give you an Excel document and say you need to complete this specific Excel document. Many times as well, when it comes to submitting cost or pricing information, they want that information in Excel. They don't want it in Word. They don't want it in a PDF format. Even though you used an Excel file to create it and then converted it to PDF, they actually want it in Excel. This is one of those areas that can get your proposal kicked out. If it's a competitive environment and you don't follow the instructions, the government or the prime has every right to say, this is what we deem to be a non-responsive, meaning you didn't follow the instructions. They will say, this is a non-responsive bidder. and they will simply toss out your proposal because you didn't follow the instructions. And we've seen this happen. We've seen where people have even protested that, and then GAO came in and said, no, you didn't follow the instructions. They kicked you out. You're out, period. So again, be very, very careful. It seems silly, but you don't want to be kicked out over, again, over a technicality. And again, it can include things like fonts, margins, page length. They want the proposal put together in a specific organization, usually with an index, right? If you're putting together a proposal for that's several hundred thousand or even into the millions of dollars, it's multiple pages, maybe there's different phases of the project, there's different things going on, it needs to be well organized. They usually want a table of contents and an index with cross references. They want to be able to get from the information in the technical volume to the cost of that particular item when they look at the cost volume. Typically, you have to submit, a management volume, a cost volume, and a technical volume, and they're oftentimes submitted to different locations because they don't want the technical people seeing the cost, as an example. Make sure that you use a proposal adequacy checklist. So these are no longer required, but the Department of Defense does have a proposal adequacy checklist. We have a version on our website. When I get to the end of today's presentation, I'll have our contact info up there with our website. You can go to our website. We've got several tools out there. One of them is the proposal adequacy checklist. And it's a great tool because it's just that, right? It's designed to walk you through your proposal, and it's asking you questions and says, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you include this? Did you include that? And ideally, right, it's a nice cross-check. One of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later in today's presentation is having somebody outside of the proposal process review the proposal. You want somebody who wasn't part of preparing it to review it so that they look at it as an outsider and see, is it complete? Did you answer all the questions? Did you fill out all of the forms? It's a great tool to give them the proposal adequacy checklist and let them walk through it and see if they can find all of the information that they need to be able to find. Section M of the RFP are the evaluation factors for award. So this is basically how your proposal is going to be graded. Right now, there's a big RFP on the street called the CIO SP4, where the government is buying computer services. This is a huge, huge contract. There's going to be lots of awardees out of it. We're doing work with a number of clients, helping them prepare for it. And the reason that I bring it up here is that some of the factors and how the proposal is going to be graded is that bidders can get extra points if they have, for example, an adequate or approved accounting system, if they have an adequate estimating system, if they have an adequate earned value management system. So if they have those things in place and they've been evaluated by a third party, then they can submit that information and they get additional points. Good thing to know. Also, you want to know, is this a lowest price technically acceptable, or is this going to be a best value, right? Is the government saying, hey, we're just going to buy the cheapest, of whatever we can find as long as it meets the requirements, right? That's lowest price technically acceptable. Or the government saying, hey, we've got a problem. We're putting out a request for somebody to help us solve this problem. We're going to evaluate the people who respond, and we're not necessarily going to choose the cheapest. Now, price is always a factor, but they're willing to look at, the historical experience. Do you have, other solutions where you have done this? Can you potentially do it faster than somebody else, right? There are different factors that may come into play when they're looking at, how they're going to make this award. They're also supposed to, while they will not give you the percentage weight of those factors, they will say, for example, price is more important than schedule, or schedule is, less important than technical, or whatever it is. They're going to identify what those key factors are and what their general ranking is. And I've already said that it could be lowest price technically acceptable. The technical term in the FAR that you'll read is a trade-off, otherwise, again, what we call a best value, meaning that It's called a trade-off because the government is saying, I'm willing to pay more potentially for something, right? I'm not going just for the cheapest. I'm willing to pay more, but I'm also willing to pay more because this contractor can get it to me 6 months faster than somebody else can, as an example, right? So they're willing to pay for that value that they're getting here. Some questions for your proposal, meaning these are some questions you should be asking yourself, asking the proposal as you're going through and reviewing it. So one question, is it formatted correctly, right? Did you follow those instructions that were in the RFP? Is your bid organized and easy to follow? Again, here's a great example of having somebody outside the proposal process read and review your proposal, because you got to remember that when you submit it, it's going to a contracting officer on the other side, or a buyer or a subcontracts manager, whoever that is. It's going to go to some technical people on the other side, right? Multiple people are going to be reviewing this. They may not know your company. They may never have bought anything from you. They may have never seen one of your proposals before. They may not even know the technology, that you are trying to sell them. So have somebody else read it and say, does this make sense? And they don't have to be a technical person. So I'm not saying, find a different engineer necessarily. Find somebody else and have them read the proposal. Can they read through it and say, yes, this logically makes sense. Yes, I see how, while I'm not an engineer and I don't understand, these waveforms and whatever might be in there, I can generally understand. I read the RFP and I see the problem, right, the government is trying to solve. I've read your solution here, and you've explained to me how you're going to use products A, B, and C combined, and how product A does this, and product B does this, and product C does this. But when you configure them together, you can see how you would solve the problem that's identified in the RFP, right? That's what you want. You want somebody on the other side of the table to be able to follow and understand the stuff. They want to be able to find the information, right? That goes back to, again, how well it's organized, and is there an index in there? Is your solution plausible, right? Again, can somebody look at it and say, I can see how that solution might work, or probably would work, as an example. Have you demonstrated your ability to perform? Have you shown that you have experience making this product or building this type of thing? Have you shown that you've solved the same or similar problems for other companies, right? It could be a commercial. You could have other, where you've done this for other commercial companies, as an example. You want to show that you have solved that problem. One of the things, I'm sure I've got it on one of my slides in here, is, I tell people to avoid the fluffery. So this is not get in and talk about how wonderful you are and all the awards and accolades and your beautiful new building, blah, 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 right? That's stuff that's not really important to the RFP. Somebody wants to know, how do I know that you can actually do the work, right? Prove to me, do you have testimonials? Do you have an online portfolio? Something that I can evaluate and say, yes, I can tell this company knows what they're doing. Have you presented an acceptable delivery schedule? Now, here's one of the things that gets frustrating in the government, right? It's this hurry up and wait game. It's what we call it. The government puts out an RFP, they've got a need, they put in their projected dates of when they want this stuff delivered. Now, all of a sudden, maybe they end up extending the due date for proposals, but they keep the same delivery date. Well, and then maybe they get in and all of a sudden they say, we expect that we're going to make an award, on such and such date. And then as they get close, they say, you know what, we're going to push that out a month. It's now going to be another month before we make, that change, or before we make that award. Well, what is the effect going to be on the delivery schedule, right? So that's one thing. But the other, for you from the proposal perspective, is, you might look at it and say, well, that delivery schedule doesn't make sense. I'm going to propose a different delivery schedule. Well, right, be very careful, right? There's a reason the government or the prime has put together a specific delivery schedule in their proposal. If you feel like you cannot meet that schedule, or you feel like maybe there's an error, right? Maybe you're looking at it and saying, hey, this date must be wrong. There's no way anybody could build this product or do this thing and meet that date, right? That's where you need to take advantage of the opportunity to ask clarifying questions and make sure. because that can happen, right? There can be errors and stuff, right? The other thing can be that sometimes the government puts out RFPs and they get a lot of pushback from industry who says, hey, we can help you solve this problem, but the date you've got in here just isn't a realistic date, right? And maybe the government or the prime needs to step back and say, okay, we're going to revise that delivery schedule. But just make sure that you don't randomly submit your own delivery schedule that otherwise is not in line with the requirement in the proposal. Is your price reasonable? So this is one of the things I always teach when I have an opportunity to teach something about government contracts. Invariably, this always comes up. At the end of the day, the contracting officer or the prime, they have the ultimate responsibility for making sure that they're purchasing goods and services at a fair and reasonable price. Doesn't have to be the cheapest price, but are they buying goods and services at a fair and reasonable price? And so that's the other thing, is you want to know, is your price reasonable? Have you done salary surveys or pricing surveys and stuff? Do you know what your competitors are charging? Do you know what's happening in the marketplace, that that, hey, this price is in line generally with what other people are proposing? Right now, you may not know, right, your exact prices of your competitors. You might know some of those prices because maybe you've been, working with them for a while, or you've seen some of their stuff. Make sure you've got a reasonable price. All right, when you're preparing the response, sign and acknowledge all of the amendments as appropriate. That's oftentimes a requirement. Make sure that you're submitting questions to clarify ambiguities, and take advantage of that. Now, we've heard through the years some people say, well, we don't like to ask questions because we feel like it's going to give away our competitive advantage, right? We're going to ask a question in such a way that somebody else is going to read that question and say, I know what they're going to do. Well, my guess is that that's probably not true. I've never really seen that to be the case. And certainly you could ask questions in a way to avoid that, right? I mean, you could say, you could clarify things. Again, whether it's clarifying the schedule, whether it's clarifying, places of work or delivery, clarifying specific requirements in the SAL. And I give you a quick example with one of my previous employers. What happened was, we reviewed the specification, we signed up to the specification, and apparently all along we knew that one of the technical requirements in the specification was going to be extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible to achieve, right? There was just something in there that we had never done before. We didn't know if anybody else had ever done that before. And we kind of thought, well, we'll just give the government what we get, right? We'll get as close as we can get and they'll be happy with it. Well, that's not a good answer either, right? So, and I'm not saying that the government will make the change to the specification, but unfortunately what happened in this situation was that we failed to take advantage of the opportunity to ask clarifying questions and do some other stuff. And in hindsight, what we learned is that if we had had those conversations up front, it would have avoided some very, very painful conversations in the middle of the development when we discovered we really couldn't do that. And we went back, we were a sub at the time, but went back to the prime and to the government and said, well, look, what you want, we can't achieve. And that was a huge disappointment to the customer because, right, we signed up saying that we could do it, and at the end of the day, we couldn't do it. Take advantage of those opportunities to ask questions. Other reasons are you don't want to make assumptions. Honestly, that's probably the number one reason that you want to take advantage of asking the Q&A is don't make assumptions. Because again, right, your assumption could be wrong, and that could get you in trouble. Other people may not ask questions, so don't be afraid. The nice thing is that everybody is going to benefit from the questions, so take advantage of those. Again, what I've said here, if you're assuming something, ask the question. Clarification questions rarely expose your strategy. Make sure that you phrase your question to elicit a clear answer. Don't ask a closed-ended question, meaning don't ask a yes/no question, right? So, for example, if it's a very specific requirement, you might say, you say that you want this to tune at X speed. what variance is there allowed? So be very clear, right? They might say, well, we would accept plus or minus 2% or whatever that might be, right? We'll accept something more, something less, but you want to be very clear what that is. Continuing here on our preparing the response, prime contractors, you need to conduct analysis on your subcontractor proposals. That's a key factor. And it doesn't matter what tier you are, even if you're a sub to somebody else and you're going to be subbing out some of your work, you need to do analysis on your subcontractors' proposals. That could include cost or price analysis. And you may need to include the results of that analysis in the proposal. I will tell you at the very least, you need some basic analysis of those results of your analysis in the proposal. And if you're performing cost analysis on a subcontractor, and they are either above the TINA threshold of $2 million, or that subcontractor's work is greater than 10% of your prime contract, then you need to include a written analysis in your proposal. And let me back up and say this, because this is an area that gets some people in trouble. I said that if it's greater than the TINA threshold, which is currently $2 million, or if that subcontract is greater than 10% of your prime contract. So let's say you've got a $5 million contract. Maybe you've got a sub that is $750,000, and you say, well, 750 is less than $2 million. I don't have to do all of this other stuff. Not true. $750,000 is greater than 10% of your contract. So you do need to do the written analysis and include that in your proposal. Remember that the subcontractor may need to submit certified cost or pricing data as part of the prime proposal. 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen is they're going to submit that in a sealed package to you to be delivered, or they're going to deliver it directly to the government. 9 times out of 10, they're going to deliver that cost or pricing data directly to the government. What they're going to give you is a top line price, right, for you to include, but you're not going to see any details. The government is actually going to do the analysis on those details. Things that you as a prime should request from subcontractors, if they have any system adequacy letters, right? So keep in mind that you might be interested in making a cost type of award to a subcontractor. In that case, they need to have an adequate accounting system, just like you would have to have an adequate accounting system to get a cost type award from the government. So if you plan on issuing a cost type award to a subcontractor, you're going to have to get validation that they have an adequate accounting system. You may be gathering information on the profit that they're proposing. In an FFP, having them disclose the labor hours and categories, right? We don't want to just see the top level price. We want to know the price per labor category, not cost details, but the price per labor category, as well as all of the labor hours that are rolling up into their price. For subcontractors out there, it's okay for the primes to request this disclosure, but it's also equally okay, as I said a few moments ago, for the subs to insist on a seal package or otherwise delivering that cost and price detailed information directly to the government. Primes, make sure that you are clear on what is included or is what is required in a sanitized and sealed package. Be very, very straightforward with that so that there's, no confusion on your part, no confusion on the government's part when you're finalizing all of this information. And for subs, and I realize, when we're dealing with the PTACs out there, some of you might say, well, I'm not a prime yet, right? Try to take this information and apply it to your situation. If you're a sub, always make sure you read the full RFP, even if the prime sends you a summary RFP. And what I mean by this is, right, so if you're a sub, right, then the prime is responding to an RFP at the government level. So I'm going to take my CIO SP4 contract or SP4 RFP that's out on the street right now and say, okay, let's say you're a sub and you're responding to somebody right? Who's trying to be a prime on that. And you know what the contract is, but the prime has only given you their RFP. Well, guess what? You need to get the full RFP that they're responding to so that you understand. And it's not that you're necessarily trying to compete with them, but you want to make sure that you understand what's required of them and what the labor categories are and what the services are that are part of a contract, so that you're putting together an appropriate proposal, and you're also keeping the prime in check, making sure that, right, the RFP they've given you is accurate, right, and it's not going to cause any problems. Um, if the government doesn't provide a method for subcontractors to submit directly to them, then you may be submitting your information again in a sealed package that's then further delivered onto the government. I don't know that I see that happen as much anymore. I have seen it in the past. Again, most of the time now, as a sub, you can just send your information directly to the government, and the prime will give you that contact information of how to make that happen. All right, we've got just about 10 minutes left. I got a few more slides. I want to talk about some best practices here. As a quick reminder, if you've got some questions, be sure to take advantage of the chat feature. You can put them in there. We should also have a couple of minutes at the end that if you want to raise your hand, there is a raise hand functionality. Try to take some questions, some live questions as well. So going through our best practices here. Read the RFP, read it again, read it again, read it again. Sometimes, when I teach this in person and it's a little more interactive, I should say, I will oftentimes say, where do you start to read? And it's always funny because in a group of people, somebody will say, well, I start in section L, right? I want to know what the proposal submission instructions are. Some people say, well, I start in section M because I want to know what the criteria is of how I'm going to be graded. And somebody else says, well, I dive into the SAL, or, and there's really no right or wrong answer necessarily as to where you start in the RFP. The best answer is to make sure that you're reading it again and again. Read it frontwards, read it backwards. And I do mean that, right? I mean, I tell people that, again, obviously make sure that you've downloaded all the information. If you're like me, who's somebody who generally reads, left to right, top to bottom, I'm going to start in the beginning and I'm going to read it all the way through. When you read it other times, start at the end, right? Read the last section and then read the next to the last section, and then, whatever. The reason I tell you to do that is that each time you read it, you're going to pick up something new. You're going to find a little nuance to something that you didn't catch before. And here's an important thing to note. You will almost always, I don't know that I've ever come across an RFP that's perfect, you're almost always going to find discrepancies. So you might find in one section it says this, but in another section it says something else. And the reason for that is that people use boilerplates, they use templates, and then they forget to go back in and change it, right? Oh, I'm putting together my RFP. I'm just going to grab this template. I'm going to copy, paste in some other stuff, right? Oh, we got some program info I need to copy and paste in here. And they forget that there's a similar but different clause in the template, and they forget to go fix that. So that, again, was one of those times where you need to take advantage of the Q&A and ask that clarifying question. Hey, on page 28, you said this, but on page 72, you said something that conflicts with that. Which one is the right answer? Again, as you're reading through, you might focus on key areas the first time. Again, some people dive into one thing, but you got to make sure that you read the entire thing. Make sure that you're putting together a compliance matrix, meaning that, and people I've seen use different tools, but they take, for example, the SAL or the specification, and they take all the shall requirements and they put them into an Excel file, and they say, okay, did we meet it? How do we meet it? Take the RFP and all the requirements, all the documents, everything that has to be submitted, put it in an Excel file, index it, and say, who did it? When did they do it? Where's the file? Where is it located in the proposal? Which section, which page number, those kinds of things. That's going to help you validate that you have completed everything in the RFP as required. Hold a proposal kickoff meeting. Bring together this team, right? I realize there's some very small companies, that team might be a couple of people. As you grow, that team might be 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 people. who are part of the overall proposal, right? People have different roles and responsibilities in the organization, and they're going to be gathering and providing different information for the proposal itself. Make sure that you identify any critical milestones and due dates within the proposal process, right? We've got a client, I was just helping them evaluate their estimating system, and they follow the color-coded team review. So they know, hey, we got a proposal that's due, for example, June 28th. So if it's due June 28th, we have to have the gold team review, the green team review, the red team review, and the pink team review. All of those take a certain amount of time. They happen at different points within the proposal process. So you got to back up your schedule and say, hey, if we're going to meet this deadline, the pink team review is going to have to happen by May 15th. And the red team review is going to have to happen by June 1st so that the green team review can occur by June 15th. And, and we want the gold team review to happen by June 25th as an example, right? So whatever it is, they've lined that up because somebody in one of those teams, right, might find an issue where it has to be pushed back and somebody's got to fix something, right? We find an error. All of those types of things, again, are going to affect your internal proposal schedule. Delegate these responsibilities. There's no one person, especially if it's an RFP or a contract of any meaningful size, there's no one person that can do all of this. So make sure that you delegate those responsibilities. Give people templates to work from. The best thing is to have internal templates of how you calculate your price, how you put together your basis of estimate, as an example. How do you document all of that? That said, make sure that there is one person who is really responsible for gathering all of the information. This is not one person who's responsible for putting it all together and writing it all up, but it's one person who is the point of contact to basically keep everybody in check. They're also the ones who are checking, sam.gov or with the Prime and making sure that they are, downloading any updates, any amendments that come along. For example, that CIO SP4, they just extended the due date the other day from June 28th to July 8th. Make sure that you're updating the compliance matrix to stay current with any of these amendments, and do not count on extensions. We had an interesting conversation with a client about the CIO SP4 and the June 28th deadline and what we were trying to accomplish. And I said, look, this is going to be tight. What are we going to do? And they said, well, we generally expect there's going to be extension, and we did too, and I think pretty much everybody else did. But she responded to me and she said, but I can't guarantee that, right? We don't have that guarantee that there's going to be an extension. So we got to charge forward, as best we can until we do know there is an extension. To avoid math errors or other inconsistencies, using rounding formulas and calculations can be helpful. Ensuring somebody other than the price proposal preparer prints it out and manually checks calculations on a calculator. Now, I'm not saying that they got to check every formula and every calculation, but you can check some key, hey, does this line total up? Do these columns total up? Does pages 1, 2, and 3 total up like they're supposed to? Some key things like that. Have somebody, again, who was not the preparer review that and see, does it make sense? Did it come together correctly? I've already talked about having independent parties, review this. Be aware of the overall delivery instructions, whether it's a special hand carry. Again, I don't know that I see that much anymore, but it could be a situation that if you're running right up to the deadline, maybe you are going to be hand carrying it to somebody, right? What does that mean? Several years ago, one of my previous employers, they got behind. I was not involved in this. I just know that it happened. They got behind on a big proposal, and the contracts manager ended up driving 6 hours overnight, like they worked late into the hours in the office, drove 6 hours overnight to another city to deliver this in person because they were not going to be able to meet the deadline to deliver it. We've also seen, I know this from one of our prior clients, and this was, again, not anything that we did because we were not involved in the proposal, but we do know one of the things that happened was they had spent a lot of time to the tune of several $100,000, otherwise a relatively small organization, about $12 million in revenue, but they spent several $100,000 putting together a major proposal. They submitted it online electronically. They were 1 minute late submitting it, and they were kicked out because it was a competitive environment. There were other people who submitted on time. Theirs got delivered late, and so they were removed from the competition. So some of those online submissions, make sure that you have access to the portal. Many times you have to log in to the portal, and it's not as simple as signing up and getting a password now. It might be something that takes several days. Do a test drive of the portal if you're able, right? Make sure that you can log in, make sure that you know where to go in the portal. Make sure you know the file types, the file sizes, the number of files, for example, that can be added. Keep in mind that, again, there can be very specific requirements. Make sure that is the requirement 5 p.m. Eastern time? Is it 5 p.m. local time, right? If you're dealing with Rock Island Arsenal, I believe they're on Central time, so you want to know, hey, is it 4 p.m. local time for them or 4 p.m. local time for me and I'm on the West Coast? If you are submitting something online or even delivering in person, get some kind of delivery receipt, get a confirmation, whatever it is. If you're sending it through email, use a red receipt, delivery receipt kind of stuff so that you can confirm otherwise that you have delivered this and done what you need to do. We're right at the top of the hour. I'm going to have, I'll give you time for questions in a moment. I did want to throw in here, we are hosting a government contract accounting summit in July. There's some information here. We'll be able to get that link out to you if you're interested. I promised our contact info. Again, our website is leftbrainpro.com. You'll be able to access this presentation and others. If you've got questions that come up after today, please do not hesitate. Send us an email. I'm always happy to answer questions. Try to help people out, point them in the right direction. The email address there, support@leftbrainpro.com. We do have other events that we do from time to time, and again, you can find that kind of information on the website as well. With that, I'm going to take a quick peek at the chat here. Daniel, did you want to unmute and come back on the line? I don't know if you've got any closing comments.
No, I don't think I have any closing comments really, other than just to reiterate, go ahead and post your questions in that chat box there if you have them right now, and we'll get them answered. And I will go ahead and type my contact info in the chat box as well for you. So if you need any help with government contracting at any point, or you have some questions later on, you can feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'll help you get set up with the PTAC team here. But feel free to contact Robert or I with any questions that you have, and we would be more than happy to help you out. I don't see anything in the chat, so Robert, I think we could probably wrap up for today.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you to you, Daniel, and the Nebraska PTAC for the opportunity to do this. Again, we'll get the recording available to everybody, and I'll follow up with Daniel so that you can share it with all your attendees.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. We really appreciate your time today, and thanks, everybody. Oh, we do have a question if you want to answer it quick, I guess.
We submitted a concept paper for a DOE ARPA grant funding opportunity and have not heard anything. Is there any way to contact them? Again, in the RFP, there should have been, oh no, this was a concept paper. I'm sorry, not an RFP. Yeah, if you were submitting a concept paper, the only thing that I can tell you to do would be to go back to that person, follow up with, where you submitted it. Again, your RFPs or anything like that, you should have contact info for somebody. If it's a formal process with the government in terms of, something that's on sam.gov, any amendments, changes in due dates, that kind of stuff should be on sam.gov. And somebody saying there was an email for questions, but there were no personal contacts. Yeah, that's unfortunately many times we see that you get kind of a generic email address, and the best I can tell you to do is to send an email and try to go through there.
Thanks for that question, Michael. if you want to follow up with me too, we can maybe try to poke around a little bit more and see if we can't find somebody to get you in contact with. Uh, yeah, perfect. All right. Well, again, we'll kind of close here, but thanks again, Robert. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's event. We appreciate that as well.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye.